Hello, Tigers! My name is Finn J.D. John, and I lead a double life. By day, I'm a mild-mannered professor teaching courses in new media at Oregon State University. By night, I'm an author and public historian specializing in unusual, little-known, and just plain weird bits of Oregon history. To get the lowdown, drop by my anchor page at offbeatoregon.com sometime. But first, I'm here to tell you a story. A story that, make no mistake, is absolutely 100% true. Once upon a time, there were two young lovers. They weren't really lovers, actually, because it was 1960, after all. That's better. See, in 1960, when you were going steady, that usually meant you were making plans to be lovers later, at least if you were a good boy or girl. Well, this boy was probably not what you'd call a good boy, but the girl was definitely a good girl. She wasn't giving it up yet. I guess he was kind of hoping that tonight would be the night. They drove up to a dark, secluded road in Forest Park off 53rd. Larry, the boy's name was Larry. Did I mention that? Larry parks the car. The radio is playing soft, sexy doo-wop. He leaves it on. He reaches for her. Then the song is suddenly interrupted. Just in, the DJ says. Lock your doors, boys and girls, because the authorities are warning that there's a criminally insane sex pervert on the loose. He's suspected of murdering young couples in 5 states and 1 Canadian province, and he just broke out of the Multnomah County Jail. Lock your doors, be safe out there, and if you see this man, dial O for operator immediately. You know, they didn't have 911 back in 1960. You'll recognize him. He's missing his right hand, and he wears a steel hook on the stump of his wrist. Well, Larry, I don't like this, says Bev. The girl's name is Beverly. Did I mention that? Beverly. It's dark out here. I'm scared. Take me home. We'll do this another night. Oh, baby, don't be like that, says Larry smoothly, reaching behind her to lock the door just in case. Anyway, I've got this. He flashes a little .32 automatic that he keeps under his seat. Well, if Larry was hoping she'd get turned back on if he showed her his gun, he's disappointed. As he goes for her lips again, she pulls away, turns her head, gives him a snoot full of Breck stop-and-stare hair. No, she says, Larry, get us out of here now. Larry growls, and he slams his battered 49 Ford into gear and winds it up and dumps the clutch, and the car flies out of the access road in a cloud of tire smoke. They drive home in silence. You know, tonight was supposed to be the night. He gets to her parents' house. Gets out to open the door for her because he may be a bit of a bad boy, but it's 1960 and Larry knows that's how you treat a lady. He reaches for the door handle. He stops short. Yeah, you all know what Larry sees there hanging from that door handle. Yep, that's right. Look, I told you I was going to tell you a story that was 100% true, right? Well, I'm going to in just a minute. The story I just told you, though, that's not it. Not true. It's not what happened. Well, actually, most of it is true. Larry and Bev and the 49 Ford in Forest Park, that part real. And the man with the hook, he was real. He didn't have a hook, but he was real. What's different is, he got him. The man with the hook got him. Both of them. The two young lovers never made it home. This is the story of Larry Peyton and Beverly Allan. That's these two kids. It was exhaustively researched and really masterfully told, actually, in this book, The Peyton-Allan Files by Phil Stanford, which, if you find this story interesting tonight, you should definitely get and read. Now, Phil thinks Larry and Beverly died at the hands of serial killer royalty. Yep, that's right, the Zodiac killer himself. And I think he may be right. Actually, I think he is right. And if he is, that would be a really big deal, because the man who killed these two kids was in jail in Portland a few days later, and they let him get away to kill again and again and again. Here's this story, or rather a sketchy overview of the story. There is much more in Stanford's book. The next morning, a cop is driving through Forest Park looking for stolen cars. People did that, they'd steal a car and go for a joyride, ditch in Forest Park. They still do that now. They just ditch them in rural Clackamas County. So the cop comes across Larry's Ford. he can see that this is not a stolen or abandoned car. There are just a few subtle hints, things that would indicate that maybe that's not the case. For instance, the door's wide open and smeared with blood. And then, of course, there's the corpse slumped in the driver's seat. It was Larry. He'd been stabbed 23 times with a 4-inch long knife. Here's a map of the place where the car was found. There was no sign of Beverly. No sign of her, that is, until more than a month later, when her badly mutilated body was found in a ditch within sight of passing cars on Sunset Highway. Of course, the public immediately starts to freak out. They're putting the pressure on the cops. Find this mofo. Find him now. So the detectives get started right away. But they've got a massive job filtering through an unbelievable volume of low-quality leads. The Multnomah County Sheriff, Francis Lambert, pretty much ruined the crime scene. He got there before the investigators and forensics people did and thought that he'd just while away the time by crawling around in the car and rummaging through it. Among the things that were not around in 1960, we have to add the CSI series to the list. Still, you got to wonder how you get to be sheriff and do something so stupid. Anyway, now he's trying to make up for this newbie boner by dashing off letters to other law enforcement agencies around the country, asking if they've had any similar crimes to report. And eager convicts in prisons everywhere are just talking their little heads off, whether they know anything about this case or not. Anything to hope to cut a deal. And then, of course, there are the local mentally unbalanced people who always start pestering the cops with tip after red-hot tip whenever something like this happens. One of those early leads that the cops stumbled across was a prison-hardened tough guy with a kind of funny name, Edward Wayne Edwards. Well, of course, we're talking along right now, and all of a sudden I'm trotting out a mysterious character that I show you a mugshot of, and oh yeah, he has 3 names, like John Wayne Gacy or Gary Leon Ridgway. Now that can't possibly be the murderer, can it? Well, wonder on till truth make all things plain. Edward Wayne Edwards had been snooping around the crime scene the day after Larry Peyton's body had been discovered. Excuse me. The cop that he met wrote his name down, or maybe he remembered his name, thought no more of it. But 10 days later, Edward Wayne Edwards got caught setting off fire alarms. He claims he did this as a prank. He has a minor, unexplained bullet wound in his upper arm. Remember Larry's .32 automatic? There was, by the way, a bullet hole in the dashboard of his car, right to the right of the steering wheel. So, the cops revoke his parole, toss him in the county lockup, and make plans to talk to him first thing Monday. Meanwhile, the cops are looking into a couple of unruly teenage drinking parties that had been held near the crime scene that night. These parties are packed with bad boys and naughty girls. Some of them knew Larry Peyton. Some of them didn't like Larry Peyton. Some of them really didn't like Larry Peyton. And several of them had criminal records for minor burglaries and robberies and things like that. There were weapons, a couple knives, an automatic pistol that somebody found in a garbage can. There were stories of fistfights around a bonfire and plenty of possible motives. So, by the time Edward Wayne Edwards was arrested, the cops were already working on a couple promising theories. You know, can you blame them? Look how guilty these guys look. Why would the cops take the time to check out this 3-named goober when they've got a perfectly good collection of local hoods and reprobates to pin it on, right? Well, so when Edward Wayne Edwards broke out of jail over the weekend and disappeared, they didn't worry much about it. I should say that again. When Edward Wayne Edwards broke out of jail over the weekend and disappeared, because he didn't want to talk to them about pulling fire alarms as a prank, they didn't worry about it. They certainly didn't ask themselves why a seasoned crook who knew how the system worked would want to avoid questioning badly enough to break out of jail when he was just in there on misdemeanor charges and go fully on the lam, or why a guy like that would get himself pinched for something as stupid as fire alarms. No, it was just, oh well. Here's Edward Wayne Edwards as a somewhat younger man. And I have to admit that he's not a particularly attractive-looking proposition. Not that I'm his type, obviously. But Was he trying to convince the cops that he was too small potatoes to be their man? Maybe he got caught on purpose, thinking he'd be yelled at, fined, and let go. Maybe he didn't realize that the cop he talked to at the crime scene would remember him. Maybe he didn't think about revoking his parole and questioning him every time about the very crime that he was trying to cover himself for was even a possibility. Maybe Edward Wayne Edwards made a huge mistake in Portland, the mistake that should have ended his criminal career, the mistake that would have done exactly that if the cops on the case had been a little bit more competent. Maybe. Anyway, after escaping, Edward Wayne Edwards settled in the Midwest. Eventually, he was caught after a big-dollar bank robbery that landed him on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list for a short time. You know, our boy liked to claim he had an IQ in the high 130s, which, is pretty good if you believe in that sort of horse pucky, but it wasn't smart enough to realize that paying cash for a brand new Cadillac and a truckload of new things for his crappy flophouse apartment might just attract some attention. Well, anyway, a hair sample got sent to Portland, just to be sure. They'd found a hair on Beverly's body, and they thought it might be from her killer. Of course, it might also have been from her boyfriend or her mom or, her travel agent, who knows, anybody. But in any case, the hair turned out not to be from Edward Wayne Edwards, and so they crossed him off their list of suspects and got back to work pinning it on some random drunk party dudes. Helping them do this was an astonishingly sketchy collection of witnesses. There was one lady who called up with an anonymous red-hot tip pretty much every time there was an article about it in the newspaper. She got started right away with an attempt to frame up her neighbor's no-good kid for the murder. Then there was a guy from the Oregon State Pen who claims that Larry asked him to steal a 50-cent box of bullets for the .32. It's 1960 at this point in time, right? You can still buy a high-powered rifle suitable for murdering the President of the United States from the Texas Book Depository by mail order. 8th grade kids can still walk to the store and pick up a pack of smokes and a box of shells for Dad, no question asked. Why would Larry need stolen bullets? He wouldn't. The con just wanted to get, out of the clink a little early, maybe make a deal. Then there was also this lady. She's the star witness, a victim, or rather a girl from one of the parties. She was like the third victim in this case. A victim not of the man with the hook, but the man with the badge. Or maybe we should say the man with the syringe. They hauled her down. They hauled her down to the Cuckoo's Nest Hospital and pumped her full of drugs and asked her questions day after day until she told them what they wanted to hear. Sorry about that. I can't edit this thing, so I have to keep going in one take. It's occasionally inconvenient. Well, finally the authorities charged 3 of those party boys with 2 counts of murder. One was acquitted, the other 2 were convicted and sentenced to life plus 25. But within a few years, both of them were paroled because nobody believed that they had done it. Not anymore, they didn't. But if not them, who? Early in 2009, the Wisconsin State Police dusted off a cold case file from 30 years before. Here's the case. It's August 1980 in the small town of Jefferson, Wisconsin. Timothy Hack and Kelly Drew are both 19 years old, both madly in love, walking home from a friend's wedding. Here they are. The 2 of them are engaged to get married soon, too. Maybe they're talking about their plans for that. Or maybe they're talking about the weather. We have no idea what they were talking about, because that's when the man with the hook showed up. The man with the hook slipped up behind them, stabbed Timothy, sexually assaulted Kelly, strangled her, and slipped off into the night. 6 months later, some hunters came across the bodies. Timothy and Kelly were pretty badly decomposed, but not decomposed enough for the man with the hook's DNA to be gone from the scene. Now, in 1981, when they found them, there was no such thing as DNA testing. But it was coming, and they knew it was coming, so the cops took a sample of the man with the hook's DNA and tucked it away in the evidence cooler to wait for a time when the technology would allow them to test it. Now, today, in 1980, that day had come. The cops ran the test, and, I'm sorry, not in 1980, a little later than that, but the day had come, and the cops ran the test, and would you look at that? It turns out that the man with the hook is none other than, you guessed it, Edward Wayne Edwards. Except that he doesn't actually look like that anymore. By this time, it's July 2009, Edward Wayne Edwards has aged into this. A 76-year-old Jabba the Hutt look-alike blob in a wheelchair on oxygen. But he is still alive. So they arrest him again and hit him with 2 counts of murder. Now, Edward Wayne Edwards' name is in the newspapers, and suddenly the authorities in other places are contacting Wisconsin. It seems he's been at the scene of a bunch of other crimes that looked a lot like Kelly and Timothy's murders, including, of course, our very own Beverly and Larry. In some of those crimes, he's even been a suspect. Let's count them down, shall we? The big ones, anyway. Great Falls, Montana, 1956. Edwards was in town when a young couple was murdered. The 19-year-old man was found lying beside his car, hands tied, shot in the back of the head. His girlfriend was found 6 miles away, also shot through the head. Doylestown, Ohio, 1977. 2 young lovers, she was 18, he was 21, were found shot in the back of the neck with a 12-gauge, execution style. Edwards actually confessed to this one. Akron, Ohio, 1979. 2 high school kids went on a date and never came back. Their bones were found 6 years later with bullet holes and knife cuts in them. Edwards was not only in town, but was mentioned in the investigation as a, quote, person of interest. And these were just the first. 2 more young couples were murdered over the following 3 years in the Akron area after that. Oh, and how can we forget? Vallejo, California, December 1968. The Zodiac killer catches 2 high school sweethearts parking and kills them both with a 9mm Luger. 7 months later, he guns down 2 more young lovers smooching in a parked car. She was 22, he was 19. He survives. She dies. Yes, Edward Wayne Edwards was in town. He was in town for all the Zodiac killer's murders. They stopped when he left. And those are, to this day, unsolved. Funny, huh? So this was the guy who'd been nosing around the crime scene at the Peyton-Allan killing the morning after it went down. Counting that, Edward Wayne Edwards was in town for at least 14 double murders involving young couples over a 25-year stretch. At 5 of those, he was actually at the scene. What are the odds? The man with the hook died on April 2nd, 2011, just a few weeks into a life sentence in Wisconsin. He never would say whether he was the man who killed Larry and Beverly in Portland so many years before, and Multnomah County decided not to reopen the investigation. Phil Stanford actually asked Edward Wayne Edwards if he did it. Sent him a letter with a $20 bill in it, and it actually got him to respond. By the way, I'm plugging Phil's book pretty hard because I kind of feel like this is his story. Almost everything I've told you tonight is from his work, putting the pieces of this whole thing together. And there's a ton more where that came from, actually, in the book. Anyway, Edwards said no, he hadn't killed Larry and Bev, but if he knew anything about the case, he'd tell Phil about it in, quote, a hot minute. Good that he's thinking about hot things, because if you believe in that sort of thing, he's probably someplace pretty toasty right now. We'll probably never know. But then again, I think we can safely say, actually we do. Before we finish here, there's something I want to point out. By the time he made it to Portland, the man with the hook was an experienced killer. Oh, this is Phil Stanford. Take a look at the places that he lived, places where he settled in and started killing. In Montana, in Wisconsin, in Ohio, in California, everything seemed to go his way. He'd sneak up on a couple defenseless teenage lovers, slake his bloodlust, and slink away for a time, and then do it again. Nobody could ever seem to stop him. His victims were helpless, putty in his hands. And then there was Portland. Edward's first job in Portland was his only job. And why do you think that was? Edwards not only made it out of Portland alive, or rather Edwards only made it alive out of Portland by the skin of his teeth. This town probably gave him nightmares for the rest of his life. First, he picks this helpless, sickly-looking, scrawny teenage kid with a surprisingly cute girlfriend as his victim. Surprise! Junior comes up with an automatic from under the seat and lets him have it. If Larry Peyton's bullet had been a little to the left, maybe cut an artery, Edwards would have either bled out and died or been forced to go to a hospital. Either way, he's done as a serial killer. But it doesn't happen. So Edwards does the job with his knife, takes away the gun, stabs Larry to death, kidnaps Beverly. Who knows what he does to her. But the next day he's nosing around the crime scene, talks to some cop. Trying to demonstrate he's too dumb to be the murderer, he pulls fire alarms, but instead of rolling their eyes and fining him, the cops throw him in jail and want to talk to him. Meanwhile, Beverly's probably alive and in captivity. Sooner or later, somebody will probably find her and the jig will be up. Again, it's only with the most amazing stroke of luck that he gets out of the can and escapes. Murders poor Beverly, dumps her by the road on his way out of town, and he never comes back. Ever. Why? Because even though some Portland cops screwed this case up pretty bad, others were right on the spot. But mostly because Larry Peyton was a total badass, disguised as a scrawny kid. Look, the man went down with a pistol in his hand, pumping hot lead into the man who was going to murder him. Every other murder victim quietly followed the murder victim script, not Larry Peyton. Because of that, the man with the hook never came back to Portland. High school kids parked in quiet places in Portland had one less serial killer running around to worry about, thanks to Larry and his .32. Now, I'm pretty sure Beverly would have done us just as proud if she'd had a .32. In fact, I bet she wouldn't have missed. But the point is, Larry was the guy that had the gun, and he used it. And although he died that night, before he did, he let some blood out of the man that killed him. And you have to admit, that's pretty good. That's it for today, Tigers. Here you have it, the credits. First and foremost, Phil Stanford, author of the book that put most of this info together for us, the Peyton-Allan Files, published by P-Town Books. You can get a copy of it at Powell's or any other indie bookstore, or pick it up in Kindle form at Amazon. Special thanks to Oregon State University Libraries, where they have the old newspapers on microfilm, and to one of my favorite Tumblr feeds, Pulp Covers. This talk is a version of a live show that I gave on Halloween night at the Jack London Bar in Portland under the Rialto Pool Room. I'm there doing a live history show on the first Tuesday of every month at 7:30 p.m. Please come on down for the next one and introduce yourself. This has been a production of Offbeat Oregon History, a public history resource for the state we love. I'm Finn J.D. John, author and public historian. My anchor page at offbeatoregon.com has links out to all the other stuff I do. The daily podcast, the Facebook page, Twitter and Tumblr feeds, this YouTube channel, and of course, the Offbeat Oregon History newspaper columns published over the last 5 years. There are more than 250 of them now. Now drop me a line at finn@offbeatoregon.com anytime. And thank you for watching. Now, go out and fill up the rest of today with good stuff. Bye now.